Hello, good afternoon. My name is Herb Stratford. I'm the Director of Programming for the Napa Valley Film Festival, and I am quite pleased to be sitting at this table with these amazing folks who we're going to have a discussion about documentary filmmaking. And so I just want to kind of go down the line real quickly and introduce our panelists for today. Dana Goldfein is next to me. And Dan Geller, who's her partner in crime, so to speak. Tiffany Schlane. Did I say your last name correctly, Schlane?
Correct.
Very good. Morgan Neville, the reigning Academy Award champion with his film 20 Feet from Stardom. We're thrilled to have here. And then also, we've got Frida Lee Mock, who is a longtime NVFF fan and supporter. She was here last year with her amazing film, Anita. And of course, she's won an Academy Award for her film about Maya Lin. So, and I'm sorry. That was weird. Just talking about their Academy Awards.
Well, we have Emmy Awards.
I know. I realized that after I went by you guys.
No
So anyway.
We don't do it for the awards.
No, I know you don't, but it helps place. Some people are like, "Oh yeah, I saw that movie." So anyway, so anyway, thank you all for being here with us today, and we wanted to kind of have a discussion about not only the art and the craft but the commerce, and if there's good war stories or whatnot, we can throw those in. But let's just start for a second, in the notion that, and it's funny that I think I just had my concept refuted right before we started the panel. I kind of feel like there may be a renaissance going on in documentary filmmaking, and from a perspective of awareness. Of course, that's easy for me to say because I'm a film festival programmer, so I see a lot of films, and the general public is not doing that. So, can you guys address how you feel like the market is for documentary films today? Because really, it seems like there's so many more platforms and so many places for people to find these films, but I don't necessarily know if that translates into audience. So.
Well, I'll jump in. I think there is a renaissance in terms of documentary film making. The means of production are so much less expensive now. The tools for post-production are less expensive now. The artistry is on the rise. The barriers to making a film are lower than they've ever been. So in that sense, there are a lot of really interesting films coming out. I call them films, but that's sort of a misnomer. But videos, documentaries, long form and short form. The problem is not even so much reaching an audience, because you can put anything you want up on a lot of digital platforms and at least have the people have access to a movie. But monetizing it is difficult. It's always been hard. Having done this for 30 years, there have been one obstacle after another. So the thing is to separate what looks to be and is a renaissance in terms of the creativity and craft and subject matter from any kind of commercial aspect, because if anyone's getting in to do this on a commercial basis, there's so many more lucrative careers.
But I'd like to address the commercial potential in that I think there are a lot more opportunities for outlets for your product after you make it, but also for filmmakers to get contracts, really. I mean, you have outlets such as, if you don't necessarily want to just do movie nonfictions, you have a lot of cable companies. There certainly are distributors interested in nonfiction. You have Netflix, certainly you have, in fact, if anything, that's undercut the theatrical audiences for us, because people just love Netflix as a source. I think nonfiction is on their high, niches. Yep. Yeah. I hear people saying, "Oh, I'll wait till it gets on. Yeah. I'll order your film when it goes on Netflix." So that's, I think, good news for any of you who wish to make documentary films. There, it depends. I think there are a lot more opportunities now than when I certainly started 25 years ago and more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Any, whatever you want.
I think it's been a really exciting period right now, because I had a feature documentary here, Connected, here in 2011, and that had a theatrical run, and just the amount of work that took after the film was made to take it out into theaters and all of that. And then after that, I was approached by AOL, which is in the kind of Amazon original Netflix, and they approached me to do a 8-part doc series And I was kind of skeptical at first, but then they gave complete creative freedom. And to reach, the show reached 20 million views, and they paid me up front. And I can't tell you the difference, just in my energy. I'm a working mom, and I have a small team, and the amount of time I was able to spend on creative versus distribution, and the amount of people that I could share these ideas I felt were important is just like mind-blowing to me as a creator. And there's a lot of platforms, and I have a project next that's a feature documentary that we'll also, have for theaters. But I think it's an incredibly exciting time because there's a lot new money sources and distribution sources for reaching important ideas in the world.
I would second Tiffany. I mean, I'm pretty optimistic. Again, not in terms of, we're not doing the next .com here. We're making films, whether they're short or long. And but in terms of the platform release, when Dan and I started out, not only were people loath to buy a ticket and go to a film theater to see a movie. I mean, I remember sitting in a theater at a festival in 1989 with our first documentary and hearing someone behind me say, "Can you believe we had to pay $7 to come and see this?" And now on a weekly basis, I would say, at least in San Francisco where we live, almost as many documentaries open as independent fiction films. And also the only outlet we had for television way back in the 80s was PBS for the most part. And now we have all of cable, and I find Netflix to be, our film, The Galapagos Affair, which is the last one that we had in theaters, made the rounds, but in 1 week on Netflix, we got over 70,000 ratings, which means, which is huge, and that's just the people who rated it. And if you're doing these things to have an audience, which is, I think, why we all do it, then it's a really exciting time.
Can weigh in, though I pretty much agree with everybody. Which is, formally in terms of the craft of documentary filmmaking, it's just been growing by leaps and bounds. If you look at the types of films that were being made 20 years ago versus being made now, the use of narrative filmmaking techniques, the use of technology. There's so many exciting things happening with documentary film from a creative point of view. And from a financial point of view, I've been doing it for 20 years. And I absolutely remember the days when a theatrical documentary was a very rare bird, and PBS was the only game in town. And then my sense is there was kind of this gold rush in the early 2000s because of Fahrenheit and Spellbound and Capturing the Freedmans. And it felt like there was like a 5-year period where people were throwing money into documentary thinking they were going to have these huge documentary hits. That didn't happen. And it kind of receded then to where we're at now, which is, the documentary market. There are 135 documentaries qualified this year for the Academy Award, which means they all played in theaters in New York and LA. So that's a lot of films that all got reviewed in the New York Times or the LA Times too. And I see all those reviews and you wonder where these films came from, and many come and go. But theatrical, I'd say in virtually 99 out of 100 cases, is a lost leader. People don't make money off of theatrical. They do it for other reasons. They do it to publicize the film. They do it for awards. And, that's fine, but the real audience is the one you find online. It's the one you find on Netflix or find on iTunes or some of these other sources. One thing I wonder about is, because Netflix was so aggressive with documentary, there's a certain moment, I wonder if it's going to come, where if you're not on Netflix now, it's a real disadvantage. And whereas Netflix has been paying big bucks for docs, the leverage seems to be going in their favor, where you may be willing to give your documentary away for free just to get it on Netflix to find that audience, if it becomes the real game in town. And I don't know. That's.
Well, it's interesting how it used to be you would try to get people to go to your site to buy your DVD, and now I kind of throw my hand. I'm like, they're like, is it on Netflix? And I'm like, yeah, it's on Netflix. It's like, I know I'm not expecting that revenue source in the way that I used to rely on it. But they do pay a lot of money for documentaries too, just to get them on.
It's also, Netflix has also changed the equation on an international basis.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, when we finished Belarus. It was before Netflix was outside of the US. And again, you were going, one by one to the different European television networks, which take forever to make up their mind, and had a lot more power than they have right now. At this point, with the Galapagos affair, Netflix made a decision in 1 second, really, to pick it up in a couple of the major territories outside of the U.S. And I'm starting to see tweets from people in the UK and people in Latin America, and I just don't think that would have happened less than a year after finishing a film 5 years ago, for instance. And I think Netflix is responsible, for better or for worse, about encroaching on those territories as well.
Yeah, one thing just about those foreign sales, which used to be a big part of how you'd stitch together your funding. The BBC used to give you maybe £60,000 as a co-production deal. Now you're lucky if you get £10,000 out of the BBC.
I feel like the Netflix made up the money.
So it's been changing, but that whole system has changed so much, and the idea of, as we've all probably done, these, good pitch or hot docs pitch panels where you're raising international funds, and it's just become so much harder to raise money in that way, and there's money out there. It's just changing, as it always is.
But our approach always has been to do work that we know we can count on, that makes us money, that is separate from the documentary. So we started a production company to do corporate media training and marketing and things like that years ago, figuring that that would be more stable and profitable in the long run and allow us the freedom. We own the camera, that's fine. We own the editing gear, that's fine. We don't own a boat, but we own a documentary instead. But that it would give us the room to play without having to wait for some gatekeeper to make the decision about whether to fund us or not. That's just a model we picked up early on. I remember there was a filmmaker named Peter Adair who had written an article, this was in the mid-'80s, about, he calculated what his time put in to get the grants on his films added up to, and then divided it by the grant amount and realized it was sub-minimum wage, and that he started a production company. And I thought, okay, we looked at each other and said, this might be a way to go, especially given the vagaries of the market there, where there were even fewer gatekeepers. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to address the issue of the Renaissance in terms of just the art and craft of documentary filmmaking, as opposed to the living wages issue, which is can you make a living. And I think there are many who can make a documentary. The technology is there. You don't have to wait for grants, divide by, and it's just your imagination and your desire and determination. Absolutely, you see, things on YouTube. You see revolutions happening because the technology allows you. The separate issue is, do you want to make, I think making a living is possibly separate, but you can't actually make a living in documentaries. And you can.
Yeah.
Witness this. Witness this $1 million panel here. But definitely, the art and craft is absolutely, the Renaissance is there.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'll just say one thing about my own experience, because I've made a living for 20 years doing nothing but documentaries, and I had a unique kind of strategy going into it, which was I decided early on that, I had been a musician and I loved music films, and I said, well, I'm going to become the music doc guy, And so I very intentionally made a number of music docs, and it got to the point I figured, as an independent filmmaker, work will find me if I do this. And it happened, and I started getting calls from all the labels. To this point, I get a call for virtually every music documentary being made, which is great as an independent filmmaker to have work knocking on your door. But it was really when people started coming to me. Cameron Crowe came to me to help produce his Pearl Jam documentary, and other people like that started knocking on my door, and I was able to basically use my producing chops to fund my directing addiction. But I got to make docs the whole time.
Yeah.
So it worked in my case because I had a niche, and people knew me for that.
Yeah.
So.
Let's just talk, you mentioned for a minute, you guys kind of touched on it, but I'm curious about, obviously I know story is paramount, obviously that's what we all kind of are drawn to, but is there is the economics of the current system, with Netflix and everybody else being kind of taking up that lion's share, is there a point where you guys as filmmakers have to say, you know what, I want to do this, but there's just no way that I'm going to ever make my money back. You know what I mean? And it's just the rights and everything is just not going to pencil out. I just wonder if that ever is a thought. Like, you have the things you can do and the things you'd love to do, but you just don't know if that's even possible.
Every time for us. But that's why our model, I mean, I'm kind of feeling like a little bit like a dunce listening to Morgan, because the world does want you to have a niche. So when we finished our first film in 1989, it was a dance film, and everyone was saying, well, what's the next dance film you're going to make? And instead of doing another one, or even another historical documentary, we went in and did a cinema verite piece in a freshman dorm. And so we have not done the niche, which has made us a lot less fundable. So I'm a little bit envious. I wish we would have found our niche. But that said, so that's why we have done the corporate route, because when we start a documentary, we kind of go, okay, we might be able to make back our expenses if we're patient over the course of a certain number of years, because we're putting our own sweat equity and our own finances into it. So that's not so much why we do it, but I bet if you talk to these guys, they'll differ.
Well, I think we have great role models, for starting with nothing and then becoming cash cow. I mean, I think Morgan Spurlock is an example. His first film, on hamburgers or, Super Size Me. I think he made for $70,000 and then, went to Sundance. It was, and just, Sydney Samuel Golden Films distributed. I think it made $10 million, 8 to 10, and where he is now. So, it's the technology is there if you have a passion for a story, and you can do it, get your friends, you can do it for nothing, quote unquote. But I would suggest, there are certain things you might do to make sure you become a Morgan Spurlock. I mean, study films, make sure you know how to make a film, all those kind of obvious things. But the good news is the technology. You can just, and there are first-time filmmakers who are nominated for an Academy Award. So, it's a renaissance of potential.
When we began, it was video was frowned upon, and it was film or nothing in terms of any kind of legitimacy. And we couldn't afford to do anything but shoot video and Betacam in the early days. And now, I mean, even with these cameras, you get these 4K cameras. They're not the best cameras in the world, but 4K camera for a couple grand, and if you know what you're doing with it, and you have a laptop with some editing gear, you can get a lot of the way. There are costs in terms of rights. Yes, certain films are expensive for rights with music and other clip material, and if you're going to get an original score, there are ways that a film can add up rapidly, but there are also ways to do a film out of passion, where you don't have to spend much of any money. And the funny thing is looking at the fiction side, because the independent feature fiction market has imploded. Ted Hope has talked about that. I think we all know Ted. The money isn't there to do a $3 to $12 million indie feature the way it had been, for a lot of the same market reasons we've been discussing. And so we know several people who are doing micro-budgeted indie features. They just have to write and make their movies. They can't be stopped, and that means $30,000 to $80,000. I mean, this is in the fiction side. So certainly on the documentary side, if one is clever about it, you can get the work done and find somehow to get the work out there.
So let's talk for a minute about the way that you guys work. I know that sometimes, filmmakers have a lot of things going on at once. So I'm just curious about if you've got multiple projects that you're doing and they're in different phases, or, are you constantly developing and then, just trying to see if things are going to hit, or, I'm curious about that workflow and how that works.
Well, I just kind of came off my season 2 of my show, The Future Starts Here, which was the first time I made 8 films at once, which was a trip for me, just creatively. And also on the web, which is different. These are all short documentaries. People could watch them all at once. People use the word binge watching, which I hate. I like visual feasting. I hate that word binge watching. Anyways, but
Yeah, 'cause you don't want to throw up afterward.
it's like an eating disorder. We don't need to say that. But sometimes people can watch my films completely on their own, and creatively I have to think about that. And we just had theater screenings in New York and San Francisco, and we're going to have in LA where people are going to watch them all at once. So I have to really think creatively about that. They're either going to watch it all together or separately. And so we just premiered those films. They're still premiering right now. They were all done and they're being released like once a week, every couple weeks. And then I'm also starting my next feature documentary, the funding, and I know that's a much longer marathon. So it's interesting, and I just said no to a big project that was a lot of money. And it was like the first time, as I'm getting older, and I do have 2 children, and I was just like, I can't, I know I can't do that. And also it wasn't my issue. It was like, it would totally suck my life for a year. And it was the first time I said no to something that was quite a bit of money. So, but I feel like, there is kind of lives of films, and these 8 films took me 6 months to make.
Really?
And
Only 8 months?
6 months. I have a team. I don't make them by myself. They're short films.
Okay.
I have a lot of animation and stuff, but like knowing you have a bigger project kind of happening and that will take a while, and then having these other things that, like, I have a team of 5 people with health insurance and full-time, so I do not do these things on my own. So always making sure that they get paid too, and that juggle happens.
I mean, I'll just say, running a production company, I've had my own company for 15 years, and for me, I'm always working on at least 3 or 4 documentaries at once. And I always think of it as like, when you're cooking and something goes in the back burner to just, simmer for a while, and then you really work on this.
Yeah.
But if you put all of your eggs in one film basket, things heat up and slow down and stop for reasons you can't control. And having the ability to have, the good problem to have, which I've had several times, is when things all heat up at the same time. And that happens, but that is a good problem to have, even though it's a problem. But to me, the only way to make it work, being a full-time documentarian, was to be multitasking as much as I could with various projects.
How many people are on your...
So my strategy for that is, on every project I have, I hire a producer that's doing nothing but that project. So I have somebody who's 100% dedicated and thinking about that project at all times. Sometimes they also have an associate producer that's doing the same. Then I have an in-office line producer that does all of the productions.
For all different
For all the
ones.
for all of them at the same time. And then I have some other kind of zone people, somebody that can do DITing and sound, and a big part of it for me, and one of the great things I love about the technology, and I own cameras and sound and light and everything, is I remember the old days when I started, and you would have to go rent a Betacam for $1,500 a day to go shoot something for 5 minutes, and it drove me crazy. And I love the ability to say, oh, I need to go shoot something in an hour, and have everything I need. So I always want, people that are multi-position players who can do anything on the spur of the moment. So, my editor on 20 feet shot second camera on some of our interviews, and I shot a bunch of stuff on 20 feet. We're all just doing everything I've done. And I say there's no job on a documentary I haven't done, from craft services to editing to shooting. I've done it all. And I like that, though.
I would actually completely second and third that. I think one of the things that's allowed the two of us to make our films is that we shoot, we can do sound, we can edit, we can definitely write grants and do all of, so you have to be to wear many, many hats, I think, and in doing, and you kind of should enjoy wearing those hats. I actually love doing all those things. Well, Dan shoots and I do the sound, but I think the more crafts that you can actually do yourself as a filmmaker, or at least understand how to do, then the better position you're in, and the more fun it can be.
Also, if you're talking about gear, because I do think that it's useful to get to put money that you raise or a grant you get toward towards some gear, and particularly things that don't date. Sound equipment, it lasts forever. Lighting gear, for the most part, lasts forever. And now that the cameras are so sensitive, negative lighting gear, basically stands and flags and nets to cut out light. Those are investments that make sense for the long haul, and to put a portion of that. We've always overlapped. First of all, on the production company, the corporate side, there's always a lot going on at once. So that's just been an engine that's been driving for a lot of years. On the documentaries, they've always, one or two have overlapped with each other quite a bit, actually almost without fail, until the end of the Galapagos affair, which was the first time where we didn't have another project lined up that we even knew we wanted to do. Part of it is we had just come off of editing a movie called Something Ventured, which was here a few years ago, which was a commissioned film, and then we're at the same time editing the Galapagos affair. Now, we're married, and it gets pretty hot in the editing room with our editors. Which
Kind of hot.
Hot
or hot?
Yeah.
Hot or hot?
Well, the wrong kind of hot, unfortunately.
Yeah, the wrong hot, yeah.
So I think that certainly for me, I felt like, it'd be nice just to go on the road with the movie, because we toured the world with it this year, and cool out a little bit and try to actually enjoy each other, which we have. And now we're starting up something again. But it's the first time where we haven't overlapped, and a funny thing happened about 4 or 5 months ago. We looked at each other after many months of saying, I don't know if I ever want to make another documentary at this point, and we each looked at each other and said, kind of itching to do something, aren't you? And well, here we are again, right?
I would want to say one thing we just invested in that has been very exciting is I write with 3 people, and we also edit together, and we just invested in a cloud editing system. So, there was to make all those films at once, we were kind of tag teaming on sleeping.
What are you using, just so I can learn?
Premiere, we went back to Premiere, at which we were Final Cut, Premiere everything, but now we're back to Premiere, has a wonderful cloud, so that people could be at their house and work on a cut, and at the studio, and it's an investment, but I'm so excited, because it used to be, it just changes the whole equation if you can use your team that way.
But don't we do that with Final Cut?
No, not the same way.
We could talk about it, because it was very exciting to just do cloud. You're doing virtual editing on the same cut.
Right.
And my animators who are in Iceland, just kind of, so I'm not at the stage where I can be doing notes on their animations remotely, which I can't wait for, like where we're looking, like we would Skype and look at a cut, and I'd give comments, notes on an animation, but I can't wait till we're in the same cut, giving notes in real time on a cut, which I haven't done yet, but.
Don't let the studios do that. Oh, God.
No, this is just me and my
Right.
director and animator.
Seal them off.
So I'm curious too, something that kind of going in the same direction about a couple subjects we touched on, but I know a lot of times narrative directors, especially first-time directors, they'll do a short because they know there's something more there. You know what I mean? They want to, it's like just enough to get the attention of financiers, the attention of an audience, to kind of stick your toe in the water. Is that something that, as documentarians, that you guys have ever done or think that works is a good idea? If you're an aspiring, filmmaker, just get something on film and show that and try and see if there's,
Can I just do one point of order, and then I'll quickly yield the floor? It's a pet peeve of mine, no offense. Good documentaries have great narratives. You go to a bookstore, it doesn't say narrative and nonfiction.
Okay.
It says fiction and nonfiction. So it's just in the changing world. I'd love to call them fiction and nonfiction films, or documentary and fiction films. But it's part of the legacy of when documentaries were bitter medicine to take and just information. So that's just my pet peeve.
I totally agree with you. We basically are filmmakers who actually specialize in nonfiction, and doesn't mean we can't cross over. But when people ask me, what is the difference? I say there's no difference, at least for me and for many of us. We know it's all about storytelling. It's about finding a dramatic arc. It's about having casting. I find casting is very important, one who can be, it's an essence of charismatic, element in that real person. If you're doing a children's course, there are 20 of them, you can only highlight 2 of them, let's say, you're going to choose out one that just pops out, So that's, so no, I don't think we do calling cards, short films to make excite a funder. I think you just make a documentary, whether it's short or long, depending on the story.
That said,
some
you
stories
might-
demand a short element,
But that said, you might shoot a bunch on your own dime and then cut together a funding clip.
Yeah, sizzle reel.
Which is pretty much de rigueur these days, because everybody does them. Even if you're applying for certain grants, they insist they see sample scenes, which I've actually, I've talked to some of these grantors about this and saying, you're asking me to go out and spend money so that you may or may not rescue me by throwing me money to finish this product, and you're wanting me to be irresponsible. And one big funder actually said, yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. But the problem is everybody else is submitting videos, so if you don't, you're at a disadvantage. So,
And I have to say, because I've been on the board of the Pacific Pioneer Fund for many years, and which funds emerging documentary filmmakers. And we put into place the request, not the demand, but the request that people show us, even if it's just raw footage. Because what we found over the years is that there's some people who can write a brilliant proposal, and when that film comes out, it's a mess. And other people whose proposals they're not the best writers in the world, but the material is stunning. And so having even a little something, and with the camera so cheap now, there's almost no excuse not to shoot a little something to show a sensibility. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be sizzly, but that was our approach.
So talk about the way that that financing plays, or just budgeting plays in your development process, because I know that kind of the big thing that always happens, especially when you go to film festivals and you hear about films being bought, and then they have these, the way that the studios or distributors, whoever will buy things, they always, the big sticking point seems to be, from my perception, seems to be about P&A, and it seems to be about, everybody wants to make sure that, yeah, you bought my film and you didn't pay me enough for it, but also what is your commitment to getting that message out there? And so I wonder if that's something that, I've talked to some filmmakers who are saying to me now that not only do they budget for their film, but they're actually trying to do the Kickstarter campaign or whatever. They're actually starting to think about that marketing, that promotion side of it as part of the initial investment, because they don't want to be left with, I've got this great film, I can't even submit to a film festival because I don't have any money left. So,
my background, I was a filmmaker, and then to make money, I used to work in technology, and I founded the Webby Awards and ran that for like 10 years. I had really a lot of business experience running the Webby Awards. So when I went back to filmmaking, I had a short film first called The Tribe, and I was like, I'm going to raise half the money for the film and half the money for the educational materials, because I wanted, it explores American Jewish identity through the Barbie doll, and I wanted enough materials to, anyways, and I went to foundations for it, and it was all funded through grants and foundations, and I really was able to, after Sundance, really take it out and get it used to trigger conversation. So with Connected, I did the same strategy, with half of the money for production and half for the outreach. Because I wanted to start a conversation. And I remember people were so surprised that I had so much money for outreach, but Hollywood's been doing that forever. Half the money for production, half the money for marketing. What do you call it? Whether you call it marketing or outreach. And I actually found a lot of funders were pleasantly surprised and very open. And now it is being done a lot more, but when I say I don't want to just be at Sundance or whatever festival and I'm exhausted and out of money, and I want to go into this film knowing that there's this money for the outreach, which for Connected really helped us and allowed me to keep my team. So.
nobody else wants to respond to that question?
Well, one thing I would say is be careful of, if you do wind up with a distribution deal, there's some distributors who take the spaghetti on the wall approach, take a fist of noodles, throw it on the wall, see what sticks. If the other stuff that falls to the floor never gets picked up, and I know many people who've been deeply disappointed when their film gets picked up and they think great, and then for whatever reason doesn't perform in the first weekend and it's done, it's toast. And there are others that do stick with it and are very careful about what they pick up and will promote it, or even if it's without a lot of money, we'll stand by that film and make it work. And then there's service deals, which are another way to look at it, that if you do have some funding set aside, you can pay an expert like Richard Abramowitz at Abramowama to take the film out for you, that he has the expertise, he knows the theater bookers, he knows how to mount a campaign. And so it's another way in. There are a few different ways to examine it. I mean, Dana and I have always done it on the release point, I would say. We always had faith that our films would get picked up and we would get them out, and it always has been the case. It might have been naive, but that's what we've been doing. But there's no one right way to make that happen.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, because you had the great success.
but I've had every experience. I've, self-distributed. We've worked with Richard Abramowitz. I've done, every different iteration. And the one thing I would say is, figure out what's right for your film.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all. There was another film I did that I just executive produced called Burn, which was about the Detroit Fire Department.
Oh, yeah.
And that film, they won the audience award at Tribeca. They couldn't get distribution. And they said, well, we know who the audience is. There are firefighters everywhere. We know how to find them.
Right.
We are going to take it out and do kind of what's the tug and whatever. They didn't do that, the tug and gather, but they did a version of that where they would ask communities, do you want us to come bring the film? And they ended up making over $1.1 million self-distributing theatrically. 1.1 million, and most of that went in their pockets because there wasn't a distributor in the middle, which is incredible how much money they made. But they had a film where they knew there was an audience that they could find that would tap into it. And, watching the film about aviation on Saturday.
that is such a huge
I just
market.
thought
I
about
was
it, like there's a huge market here, you know
That's
exactly how to find them.
Yeah.
I would self-distribute this.
And a distributor won't find it.
Yeah, and a distributor wouldn't see it in the
Yeah.
same way.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of finding the right fit for what your film is.
And somebody once said, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Somebody once said to me, every film's totally different. Every film has such a different path, and they are so right. I mean, you're just saying, like, every film has such its own journey that's so specific to the subject and the filmmaker. It just reveals itself over and over again.
And not only that, go ahead.
Oh, well, and just say, there's no guarantee if you're thinking about, this is going to get a distributor. I think it's basically you're going to make your film, and most of us, before we got a little more sophisticated, that, you mean we have to distribute it? Most of us just did something and then finally woke up to say, then you scramble. You can learn very quickly how to figure out how to get it out there. Yeah. And it can be as simple as self-distribution. This sounds fantastic as the aviation film, or 20 Feet, about the big kahuna distributor.
So that was the opposite experience. That was the old school experience, which it was the opening night film at Sundance. Our sales agent, Josh Braun at Submarine, basically told everybody, if you want to buy the film, show up opening night, and we're going to sell it opening night.
Wow.
And
the cojones.
Yeah. And I trust him. He's an amazing sales agent, and we ended up with 3 people at 5 a.m. from 3 companies bidding. And
Are you waiting, just to describe a little more, where are you in that?
So it's funny. So the way it actually works is, we were like a 9:30 opening night screening at Sundance. Then everybody huddles in the lobby, and Josh and his team are all on phones talking to various distributors and who's in, who's out. Then we went back to Josh's condo, we powwowed, and then we did this kind of dog and pony where we would go to one of the condos of one of the distributors. They would give us beer and pizza and hang out and be cool and then tell us how great they were. And then Josh would show up to talk money with them, and we'd go to the next condo and meet with the next distributor. By the time
hopefully had better food at the next
well, it's always beer and pizza at that time, 4 a.m.
It's not Napa.
So you're walking
It's not Bouchon,
No.
not Bouchon.
not Bouchon.
Chocolate-covered lady.
And it's funny because our producer, who had come from the music industry, turned to me at some point. He said, "Look, I've been in the music industry for 30 years. I've stuffed cash into James Brown's hand backstage at the Forum to get him to go on stage, but I've never done business like this." We're like, yeah, it's actually totally insane how.
Ultimately, did you have some say in the final?
Yeah. No, we picked. I think, the best distributor for our film. I mean, and part of it is, and I tell people this now, if you're lucky enough to end up in a situation like that, really figure out what's important to you. Is it, how many cities, or what kind of a theatrical day and date or not a day and date? Have kind of your own game plan mapped out beforehand, because when it's 5 a.m. and you're starting to get into details,
You're a little bit.
that you need to agree on the big stuff, because once you get into negotiating those things after the fact, after your film has been announced that it's sold and you haven't negotiated the contract yet, they own the details.
Right.
Yeah.
So the more of those details you can get up front,
Were
the better.
you happy? I mean, afterwards,
No, we had an incredibly contentious 2-month negotiation to get the contract done, but that's typical with any distributor. But we got a compromise we all liked. But just in terms of dealing with them, they were fantastic. And part of that was, it was a division of Weinstein Company called Radius. Radius was brand new, and Radius really wanted to prove themselves. It was made up of a number of people. Tom Quinn had Magnolia, and he really wanted to prove himself. And I felt like all of us had the same goal for the film. And he had this idea that we were going to do an old school, traditional theatrical release. And our film came out in June. The DVD came out in January. And now, in the day and date, we held back all of that for a good 6 months. But the film played theatrically for 365 days. So it was in theaters for an entire year.
Wow, it's amazing.
Which is amazing. That's very, very rare.
Like, do you think that would happen again?
No, I mean, Sugarman did for a year,
It's a great.
but it's very rare. And this year, there's no film.
No, everything collapsed, and one thing that we noticed that when we released in April with Zeitgeist Films in the U.S., the number of documentaries opening that weekend, something like 7 or 8 of them.
Just in New York.
4 of them into the same theater in Lincoln Plaza Cinema, which was deeply distressing, because they should have known better than to do that. They fragmented the audience. I think part of that is because the theaters need product, and these indie fiction features are not being made right now. So they're just putting anything up on screen for the time being. And so the grosses are down, and we're talking about this is still kind of a small band of documentary film making and film releasing, so I don't want to skew it too much toward theatrical, but our numbers were a third of what Ballet Russe did. And Zeitgeist Film spends very carefully, very little money. They'll spend a little money to make less money than someone spending a lot of money to make more money, but ultimately the filmmakers come out ahead, because theatrically, Jonathan Dana, our exec producer, said, would you rather have someone spend $100,000 to get you $300,000 at the box office so that you come out ahead in cash, or spend $1 million to get to $1.5 million and you're in arrears? But the point is that whole market is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And then there's this question about the utility of the market. It's great for word of mouth. It's great for the New York Times reviews, if it's a good review. LA Times, it does help create visibility. But in an age where internet word of mouth can go viral, if you're up on a platform and the idea is to get it before eyeballs, maybe some of this other model isn't the only way to get an audience for a movie.
Well, that's what, just going back to the Future Starts Here, where we had, as a filmmaker, I don't think any of us, and after just seeing so many great films in the theaters here at the Napa Film Festival, there's nothing that replaces that theater experience. So, for the Future Starts Here, we have the viewership is gigantic, more than I've ever had on any of my other films. And I wanted that theater experience, so we're having city theater experiences on our own. It's like when you really start thinking why is that? If I can reach more people online to have a conversation, but I still want that theater experience, so I'm still going to do that in these cities, just one in each city, because they'll all tell you it is an exhausting experience to have. Just the energy, and I'm really into, as I get older and just my kids, less time, more impact. How can I make more impact, but it just takes less time away from my kids? That's always the way I'm thinking about things. So I still want that theater experience, but can you get that in a different way? And can the online grow?
let's say, what we say today may change actually next week, because we all have heard the distribution landscape, whatever platforms, iTunes or whatever it might be, or traditional movie theaters. It just is that there's no predictability. But still, at least today, the traditional model of what you did and what Anita did, which is you open in the theater, get your reviews, you get on, if you're lucky, Jon Stewart, et cetera, that what you do this to drive, actually, your DVD, your iTunes, your downloads. I mean, that's what they want, is that free publicity from all the feature articles, if you're lucky, and all that, TV stuff. So you will still do that, even though the numbers, it's not for you to, except maybe with few films, we'll still do box office.
Right.
One thing I'll say about my experience last year was that I went to 26 film festivals last year. So it's a lot of wine and cheese. And
You can go to Napa Film Festival.
we did do a screening here,
But it wasn't
but it
Napa
wasn't
Film
during, it was just
Yeah, no,
before.
we did a special
I know,
screening
I know.
off-season, yeah.
And Lisa
and that
Fisher
was-
came up because she was playing in San Francisco with the Stones.
good.
So,
And if you look on YouTube, you can see her singing at the screening. It was amazing,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
but part of that strategy, it actually worked incredibly well in that, we figured our film was a word-of-mouth film. That's what was going to sell it. And the more we showed it to people, the more they wanted to tell their friends about it. So we said, let's, from January to June, do every festival we can. And we had all these singers who were willing to go and visit. And we had singers on the East Coast and the West Coast all doing zone PR. And then another thing we did that I thought, it was not my idea, it was the distributor's idea, which I thought was great, was we go into a city like Miami or Minneapolis or New Orleans, and we'd contact the local music writer or the local film writer and say, the film's going to be coming out here in June. Let's do a profile piece now, or do photos and do articles, and just put it on the shelf, and you'll have your own individual coverage when the film comes out. So we had regional press, tons and tons of regional press we'd banked while we're going around the country to film festivals.
Smart.
Which I thought was so smart.
Yeah, you should all write down that information, because it's absolutely, I was going to say something like it, although we don't have quite as large an example to show, but I would say, both what Frida said is true, which is you do the theatrical not to make money, or even to enjoy, although it is fun to sit in a theater, and listen to the audience react, it's really to drive future sales of other things, and also that the landscape changes on a minute-by-minute basis now. So each time we come out with a new film, we have to relearn how to distribute to a certain extent, and to take a lot more things, or a lot of different things into account each time. And then the other thing I want to say is, if you're lucky enough to have a choice of distributor, you have to decide for yourself what kind of relationship you want to have. So, for instance, we've chosen to go with Zeitgeist Films, which is a very small distributor for our last 3 films, and part of that decision has been that even though they wouldn't offer as much of an advance, we love the partnership with them. And we love the fact that when they're cutting a trailer, we get to weigh in on it and give notes, and they're not going to finish the trailer until we say, hey, you know what, we like that. We love the fact that when they're having the poster designed, they're giving us 5 different choices, and our decision is as important as anyone else's. So you have to ask yourself, how important is it to have a creative role in the distribution, and take that into account if you're fortunate enough to have a choice in distribution.
So, we touched on the importance of film festivals, and I think for a lot of people, and probably a generation of people, that's where they were seeing a lot of this content. Like, we mentioned PBS, but it's almost, I know as a programmer at a film festival, I know that one of the things that I look forward to the most, and I feel that one of our strong points here in Napa, is great documentaries. And so how do you guys see that, the film festival as being a role? I mean, there's so many film festivals. I mean, they are born and die very quickly all over. I mean, every community has just tons of film festivals. But is that still kind of a central spoke in your kind of process about how building buzz and things like that?
Yeah, it depends on the festival, and many distributors will charge a screening fee for festivals that might not be the ones that attract the most press or are deal-making festivals. So it's actually a revenue source for a lot of films, especially more niche ones. I mean, not like Napa Valley, but ones that might be specific about a subject, about an environmental film festival in Tampa and so forth. That can be a real revenue source and also a very strong way to, if you're making a social issue film, to activate a community to do something. And that, we can't slight the power of documentary film to enlighten an audience or, without being agitprop, to get an audience passionate about something that is of a current concern. And so the festivals are great because then you get instant community access there. And also festival audiences tend to be the friendliest you'll ever find. They're really supportive.
But distributors are very wary that even though you have an enthusiastic SRO, of reaction in the festival may not translate into box office.
Absolutely true.
And so, I think festivals are strategically important, really.
Yeah.
But the particular one, obviously, Sundance is the big one because the distributors are there and the press is there, the world press. Yeah.
I mean, if there are aspiring filmmakers out here, one thing I always say as a piece of advice is do not rush the completion of a film for fill in the blank, for Sundance, for South by, for Toronto, any of the big deal-making festivals, because people feel like they have to get it done for that festival or all will be lost. And films have been rushed out the door that are not half-cooked. But if they'd only waited 6 more months to get something to just bring it the rest of the way, they would have had, a much finer film. So that, if I don't have a lot of advice, but that's one.
No,
piece.
actually, he gave me that advice on Connected, and I
It's true.
appreciated it. It was really right. It needed another year, and don't rush the festival. That was a really big lesson. And also, I'd say, just as a filmmaker, I love coming to film festivals. I mean, I don't live in LA. I mean, I live in San Francisco, and I feel like going to a film festival, I'm with people that love independent films. I get to hang out with other filmmakers. I don't have a lot of time where I do that. So for me, I love these panels. I love, probably, I was just writing in my journal about that this morning. I love, this is the kind of special event that just fills me with gratitude for being a filmmaker and all the people that support filmmakers. I mean, it's so great that how great it is that we do a profession where there's these things that sprout up all over the world that invite you and they put you up and they create a great audience. I mean, I just feel super grateful that we're living in a time, it didn't used to be, where there are thousands of film festivals. And Napa Valley is so, I mean, this is such a great festival that you eat so well and you're in this beautiful space, all these great people. So I just feel super grateful that my husband is a professor of robotics and they have conferences, but they're not like this. We were joking. He's like, you'd come to me with my film festivals. He's like, you wouldn't want to come with me to my robotics festival and wherever. And I'm like, you're right.
So let's make sure we have some time to answer some questions as well. So who's got some questions for the panel? Right, you can stay where you are and go right there in front. Yes.
Hi. Sophia Coppola was I'm a retired high school art teacher. Sophia Coppola was one of my students. Had her father come in to talk about breaking into industry, and he said he'd mow lawns, he'd babysit just to get his foot in the door to be a filmmaker. He also had a degree in filmmaking. How do you get your foot in the door if you don't go to film school, and can you do it without going to film school?
Did all of us go to film school?
Did any of us go to film
Did any of us go to film school?
I didn't.
I couldn't afford it.
It's a mix here.
I decided to make our first film with the money I would have spent to go to film school.
Yeah, and I always say my first film was my film school.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
One of my films in the future starts here is called Creative Bondage. And it's all about how I was at UC Berkeley, but I couldn't afford to go to film school. But I had to learn how to make films really creatively with other old movies that I recut together, and it completely informed my filmmaking style. So that creative bondage of not being able to go to film school was like the best thing that ever happened to me. But you should also, I do believe you should study the masters. Like I studied film theory, which I feel like.
Or just, there are certain steps you can do, instead of doing film school. I just say, watch really great fiction and nonfiction movies.
So
I mean, it's just, and find out what makes them, why are they good, why are you reacting to them? And then, of course, maybe read a book that is highly recommended and take a few classes,
I did go to film school, by the way. I feel like the schmuck at the table. Because the only dumber thing than going to film school is to go to a film school that is all about documentary film. What's the point of it? It actually was great. I went to Stanford for the grad program, and it's a fantastic program. And but the truth is, for documentary, well, if you're making fiction films, there's a lot of sense to be at UCLA, USC, NYU for the alumni network and for breaking in, because it's tough to get your foot in the door. There is no door in documentary filmmaking. You just make the movie.
Just a couple things. I mean, when we're not under tight deadline, we actually have movie Fridays where we stop and watch documentaries or watch narrative films just to be able to have a discussion.
Fiction films.
Fiction films. Catch myself. We do narratives. Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'll get my nomenclature right. Okay. Right. But I think, I mean, you never stop learning that way. So you're always watching things. And in fact, sometimes I get the best ideas from terrible films too. You know, it's random where you get ideas from. So always keep learning. But the other thing is, you know, I came up as a journalist, and as somebody who works in Los Angeles and has hired many, many kids out of these film schools, UCLA, USC, and AFI, I think they all make films wrong. And I basically spend all of my training with untraining them.
Wow. Can you give some examples?
Well, in scripted films, you write a script and you shoot a movie. In documentary, you shoot a movie and then you write a script.
Yes, yeah.
And so much of what film school is about is, what's your voice? What do you want to say? And you get in these habits where you get kids out of film school that feel like they have their completely made-up mind and preconceived notions about exactly at 21, you know, they're all Orson Welles, and and they all, you know, when they interview people, they interview them like they're interviewing a hostile witness in a court case. Like, isn't it true that, you know? And for me, documentary is all about listening and reacting, and about trying to get yourself out of it and opening up that space for the subject and the story to flourish. And so for me, it's really kind of an inverse skill. And for me, and that's why I always, you know, I like to hire people out of journalism programs almost more than out of film programs for that very reason. So.
My question is about crossover between fictionalized topics and documentary. Are any of you involved in that crossover, or has anybody been doing this? I.e., the topic of prison reform in terms of a fictional movie.
You're saying like a social issue.
A social issue.
But that's done as a fiction film, not a nonfiction film.
Right. But has that documentary feel to it? There's some truth. It's all based on the social issue. Or has nobody crossed over yet?
I think there are plenty of people who go back and forth, and I must say that fiction films also have a truth, really, and that it's just that, you know, look at Philadelphia dealing with the issue of AIDS, you know. I mean, you can do, the truth is in the doing and the intention, but yes, we have filmmakers like Michael Apted who go back and forth, but you're saying taking a nonfiction subject and dramatizing it, fictionalized, yes, there are, that is absolutely something that's done.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah.
Most of my experience is in live TV and production in live TV, and I'll be tackling my first documentary next year. So anything that you wish you would have known, it was just a simple fact, like a piece of paper you knew you needed signed, or something that you wish you had known on that you learned on your first film school documentary, I would greatly be appreciated.
Well, you mentioned paper. Have a release form and get releases signed on the spot. Do not ever wait for someone to do it later or after the fact, or allow for any kind of permission or review to take place after the fact. So, you know, those papers, arguably, what's the legality in some of those papers? It's really unclear, but it makes the insurance company feel good and a distributor feel good because they need that. And so, take a whole bunch of physical photocopies, that's it.
But I would say one step before that would be, I think, in nonfiction, and even fiction, I think you really need to establish a trust with the person or persons you're dealing with. If it isn't, I find if it isn't there, you're going to have a problem.
That's true.
Yeah, and that's a basic. Don't go down that road unless they feel comfortable with you, and it flows from that.
My
Recently.
one bit of advice, get good sound.
Yeah.
Yes.
Much more than worrying about images, worry about the sound.
Yeah, bad sound. And also, the American University has a great kind of handbook for what images you can use under the auspices of like telling a documentary story, educational story, and I'm just like spacing on
Like fair use.
yeah, she's Pat.
Pat Efferdahl.
Yeah. So fair use, like really read. I think there was stuff I paid for.
That you shouldn't have.
I shouldn't have. I mean, there's some stuff you should definitely pay. I mean, my biggest line item is licensing footage. But when I look back after I really did a thorough review, I would definitely go to her site. She's got a great filmmaker handbook. And there's some stuff I paid for I don't think I should have paid for. If you go
Pat
to-
Offer,
you go to-
A-U-F-E-R.
That's what I was trying to- but
But
go
she's
to
at
the
American University, and Duke University also has a good
And
site.
it's called, if you just look at Fair Use Filmmaker Handbook, it's so valuable to really know your rights as a filmmaker.
The other thing I would say, and this is just something that we've been doing since we've made now 3 films that have used some archival historical materials, especially stills, and we'll often be interviewing someone for the first and only time. We always bring a scanner, and I know that sounds kind of weird, but like when we were in the Galapagos, we couldn't rely on there being scanners down there, and so at the end of every interview, we would just quickly, in as much high res as possible, get these people's still photos, and then we'd come home with stuff that we didn't. I mean,
Well, actually just recently, I was at a family member's house who had a photo album, and I literally, with my iPhone camera, is a nice camera now, and I sat there and took photographs of these family photos that I knew I would never, and the photos, I just printed some, they're amazing. I mean, the quality you can get on a cell phone these days.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
That's
I mean, a
true.
cell phone, a scanner is awesome, but if for some reason you don't have it, you really can do wonders with your camera.
And then back everything up on multiple drives.
Yes.
Frida's got to go, so.
Frida's got to catch an airplane.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Frida.
I'll do it.
Oh, wait.
So we're back here in the back.
I got the mic. But can the remaining panel please comment? I make docs too sometimes. On the documentary making where your film crew or your filmmakers are placed in danger in the modern world, in war zones or difficult, like, medical or the drug war type documentaries. There's been a lot of that recently where the filmmakers have been harmed as a result of hot, controversial topics. If you care to comment?
We're chicken.
I just haven't made.
No, I mean, I largely do cultural documentaries, but, and I was shooting in Jordan last week. I was a mile from the Syrian border. That was interesting.
counts.
That was still pretty safe, considering, just seeing a film like Virunga. I don't know if anybody's seen that film. It's on Netflix right now, where the filmmakers are being shot at while they're running. I mean, it's intense. Or E-Team, another film with incredible bravery on the behalf of the cinematographer. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's terrifying, and I am amazed at the bravery of filmmakers who are doing this, because typically they're doing it out of a real deep need to illuminate an injustice, and at considerable risk.
Yeah, the Chicago Girl, which is here at the festival, which is so wonderful.
Yeah, those.
Back here.
I just have a question about, as a aspiring documentarian, I find myself going in front of the camera and behind the camera, back and forth as the photographer and the interviewer. Do you have any advice or guidance from that standpoint as which approach to take and encouragement on continuing forward with that? I find myself trying to give up sometimes and getting overwhelmed from bouncing back and forth and the editing process and that taking so many hours. So it's just a ongoing battle. Any inspirational guidance on that?
It's a personal thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a personal thing. I mean, I think the more you can get other people to to work with you or even just to bounce your ideas off of. Even though I can edit, I don't edit my own material just because I like to have a dialogue with another person. And, my first documentary, I brought in, we had no money, so I found another young editor who was willing to work for free, and we worked, it was actually, the first Avids had just come out. And, it was like AVR3, like giant pixels, and we had a 9 gig drive that cost $5,000. Yeah. And we got free time on an Avid from 10 p.m. till 8 a.m. And so we edited all night long for a year to finish my first film. And nobody made a penny, but it was important for me to have that different perspective. It's always important to have a different perspective. And I'm sure we probably all do this too, is as you're making a film, sharing it with people you trust, having screenings, because the first thing you lose when you're working on a project is perspective. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, actually, at this point, which is so lovely now, I have there's 3 or 4 people that I put into the schedule to show them rough cuts. They're my story consultants, advisors, but they're so much a part of my process now. I want that. I trust them. I don't necessarily trust. That was my biggest apprehension when I was asked to do this show by AOL. Was I don't want notes by people I don't know, and I put that in. I got just notes from my people that I really trust. But that's such a wonderful relationship from people that you just totally admire and trust to give you notes is fantastic.
And when we have our work-in-progress screenings, we typically have about 4 to 6 along the way, where we invite people who might know something about the subject matter, ones who know nothing, ones who know film, and ones who might be writers or musicians who don't know film necessarily, but understand how to look at a work in process and imagine a little bit of where it might be headed. And when everyone agrees about what's wrong, it's wrong typically. Not the solution.
It's wrong.
Right,
It's
but
finished.
It's not the solution about how to fix it, but if they're all saying, and when everyone has something that they think is wrong, and generally they don't agree with each other, the film's done.
I made a film called The 10 Stages of the Creative Process, which is part of this series of The Future Starts Here, and I kind of go into my rough cut screening process, and it's a really great part of the process if you get into it. Good people.
Actually, my favorite documentary in terms of the creative process that I find myself going back to every time we're stuck in the editing room is something actually by Lars von Trier called The 5 Obstructions.
Oh, yeah.
And he has this other filmmaker remake a 10-minute short 5 times. And each time, in a very diabolical way, Lars von Trier puts up these obstructions that the filmmaker is not allowed to use in the remaking of this film. And to watch that every time I get stuck, I find it incredibly illuminating and inspiring, and I realize, you're never really stuck. You need other perspectives sometimes, or you need a nap, or you need something. But anyway, I highly recommend that as an educational.
Another one of my favorite things is, do you know Brian Eno's Oblique Strategies?
the cards.
So there's actually an app for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
So, as a famous music producer, he developed these cards, and when a musician was stuck, he would pull out one of these cards that would say something like, play as quietly as possible, just to inspire you and make you try something different.
Wonderful.
So I actually use those in the edit base.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
It's called Oblique Strategies.
It's also a great deck of cards.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm not sure if my question is different enough now, because it seems like you started to address what my question is going to be in your last little bit there. But my question is, at what point do you find yourself stuck or unsure, and how do you then move forward?
I usually bring, if I feel stuck, every project, in this film, The 10 Stages of the Creative Process, every project I can look to that time where I am really stuck. I call it it's just like the forest fire. And it's usually right before I have the big breakthrough, and I'm old enough to know that it's, when you know that there's going to be some light at the end of the tunnel, and I bring in the advisors at that point. Or sometimes I'll have an emergency session with some key people I trust to look at it and give notes.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of death. No, I feel like in every case, at some point, with each film we've made, we've done 7 feature docs at this point, that I've totally screwed up the movie and that we have a turd on our hands every time.
Every time.
And many with our editors too, where the editors will say, geez, I don't know what kind of out of tricks. And then you just take a breath.
Step away from the project.
Step away from the project for a week. Sometimes it's useful, a week or two, just say, we're shut down for a week or two, just need to recharge here, then look at the feedback again and march on through, because, too many things are on the line at that point. And I don't mean money, I mean people who've given their lives, especially apropos of what Morgan was saying, when getting these people who give their lives to you for a movie, and they're entrusting their stories and their representation, and it's an incredibly generous and fragile thing. So I feel like we'll never stop. We'll find a way to make it work, We owe it to them.
I have a question about sources of funding. You talked about new sources of funding that are opening up. So I was wondering what some of those are, and besides crowdsourcing, which we know about, unless you have a specific tip on crowdsourcing. And then what do they respond to? When you're going for funding, what do they since you can't go in with a completed story, right? Because you have to film it and then you get the story. So do they respond to impact? Do they respond to your history? Do they respond to, I'm sure it's a combination of those things, but is there anything in particular that you think
I'll give my quick wrap on funding, which is, to me, there are 4 sources of funding for documentaries. There's grant funding. There is co-production funding, which typically used to come from a broadcaster, but now could come from a Netflix or an AOL, but somebody who is essentially expecting rights back, because they want to broadcast this or distribute it in some way. There's crowdsourcing funding, and then there's sugar daddy funding, which basically means just a rich person wants to pay for it.
And sweat equity is the fifth.
And sweat equity is the fifth, but that's kind of a given on every project, because you're never paid enough for the time you put into it. And a lot of documentaries, a lot of them, maybe a third are paid for by somebody that just wants to see a film get made. And I've done films all 4 of those ways. And it changes, and I'd say the thing, yes, reputation or track record or whatever helps, but for the most part, it really is a matter of coming up with a teaser or something, or an early cut, depending on how far you can take it down the road before you need financing. In this day and age, I remember when I started, you used to write 15-page treatments and people used to actually read them. Now
It's like
people,
a couple pages.
Yeah, now a couple pages, people will not read more than 2 pages. All they want to do is see the video, and the video is going to do 95% of the sales job. And in terms of impact, there are a few companies like Participant that has a double bottom line that will look at impact.
And impact partners.
And impact partners, and a few people like that will look at both the impact of a production and its financial viability. But those are just a handful of companies that do that.
I've seen like a trend, especially with network television shows like The Office and Parks and Rec, kind of co-opting the nonfiction look and feel with the handheld cameras, the testimonials, the camera, the jump cuts, as well as like the exciting trend of a lot of documentaries and nonfiction films taking on some of the visual styles of the fiction films. I'm just curious what your thoughts and approaches are with that.
Well, I think the documentaries can look and are looking generally a lot more artfully constructed than they had been, and that's a good thing. And I think that the appropriation of some of the run-and-gun style in fiction, and in comedy especially, has to do with the sense of spontaneity, which is hard to achieve in a lot of fiction writing. The spontaneity can leach out, and it gives it a little boost, a little extra energy. And I don't work in that field to know enough, but I wouldn't be surprised that it also adds something for the actors. That if you have a couple of camera people with the cameras on their shoulders and they're shooting it in a little more of a verite style, it allows some room for the actors to move without necessarily hitting the exact marks and to be a little more free and spontaneous.
I mean, just 2 of my DPs I use, Shauna Hagen and Mark Schwartzbard. Mark did all of the Borat movies as camera operator, and Shauna does all of Park and Rec's or Parks and Rec, you know.
Right.
So it's interesting because these people are using doc camera people to shoot those shows.
Yeah, you know, I've always fallen into the documentary group, but I've actually never really felt like I mean, I don't know if you see my films, I'm not interviewing people. It's actually quite different, and which I always, you know, it just feels like your films are just like in a category that doesn't feel like it has fit. And this show, The Future Starts Here, got nominated in a documentary Emmy, awarded a new category they just added this year called New Approaches in Arts, Culture, and Lifestyle. And I was like, yes, that feels like it fits. Like, I don't feel like, these guys make great documentaries. It's a different style than I mean, and so I was so happy to feel like there was a category that was like in this blurry space that I always felt like I've been in. So I think we are living in a very kind of blurry time, which is exciting, where it was film series, TV series, web series. Now it's screen series. I am watching documentaries on my laptop in bed. What I watch, it doesn't matter what, like the screens are becoming blurry, and so I love this blurriness, the length of time, how long something needs to be considered official or make it. I love that that's blurry, and that's kind of where we're in this renaissance of blurry creativity, which is kind of extremely exciting.
And with the limited depth of field of those DSLRs, a lot of the footage is blurry too.
Hi. So I came at filmmaking a little different. I was at a big company with big budgets and big productions, and for a long time. And then my experience was I'm a musician, and I would have this experience of you do a song and it's in the movie for a year, it's in the movie for 2 years, it's in the movie 3 years, and then it's out. You know, or it's in the movie, oh, it actually sticks, and you get a big check, yay. But then I had the experience of scoring a movie in competition at East Side Sushi, and so I got to go into a studio for a day, and we didn't have much of a budget. But 2 months later, it was, you know, thousands of people were seeing it and enjoying it, and, you know, made a little money. And so I guess what I'm saying is, or I'm asking is, have you found that your friends that are doing fiction films actually, it's not like they're actually making more money. You know, they're making maybe like a chunk of money, and then there's a lull, and then they make a chunk. Whereas in nonfiction or indie film, it's like you can, you know, make a steady state and keep working. Is that?
I would argue that in that sense, a documentary might have a more natural way of making money if it's got, because most documentaries have subjects that if you can tap in a way, it's like what Morgan was talking about. You know, you go ahead to a town and you tap into the music, or with the aviation film, you know, with ballet, or what. Yeah, every documentary has a subject, and if that subject interest group is marketed to in the right way, which I think is much easier to do now with social media, then I do think it's easier to sell it, or to get people to look at it, to get eyeballs on it, than it might be with an independent fiction project. But that's just my opinion. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those advantages of doing music docs, is that there's always an audience for a music doc, as long as there's somebody that likes that music, you know, which is pretty much every type of music. So that's a real advantage, and that means, I mean, it's another thing about financing music films is that it has been easier, you know, and I make non-music films too, but I've done a lot more music ones, in part because I started that way, but also they're easier to fund because there's always
An enthusiast.
not only an audience, but there's a group of people with a vested interest in it happening. So particularly if you're going to make a documentary about a band or a songwriter or a label or a producer or whatever, there's a publisher and an artist and a label and you know, a bunch of people and maybe an agent and a manager and all these people and an audience that all want it to happen. You know, so it's not like you're starting from scratch. You know.
All right, well, I think we are just about at the end of our time period, unless there's any last burning question. Are we all good?
When you're organizing a documentary, what about chronological? Just to say that myself, this movie box, you're just putting something that happened in history against something he's doing now. And you told me so you didn't have much training. And some of the things I don't know, it should have been more chronological order. I love the overall feel of the whole thing.
Yeah, there are no rules. There are no rules for that. The thing is to try to make it clear to an audience that you are leading them somewhere. And even if in the moment they don't know exactly what they're seeing or why they're seeing it, becomes clear really quickly. So one of my editing mottos is whatever scene is coming next should be an utter surprise and absolutely logically should be there. And they hinge off of each other that way. If it's predictable and it's there, you lose energy. If it's a surprise and it makes no sense whatsoever, you start to lose the audience. So, but there are no rules in terms of chronology. It's only the sense that you, with a very good storyteller, you know where you're going. But there's this other thing we talk about classically in the New Yorker magazine in their articles, paragraph 6. It's maybe another number, but they're telling the story, and all of a sudden, paragraph 6 is so-and-so was born in Detroit in the year 1960. And you feel like, okay, now we've established where we're going this story, and we can take a bend here and a tangent for a while and then come back.
But yeah, there's no rules at all, I don't think, and that's part of the fun of it.
Yeah.
That's a great way to.
No rules.
No rules.
And that's the fun.
I just want to thank our panel for being here today.
You're welcome. Sure. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
And so let's go out and go see some more films. We've only got a couple left.
And make some.
And make some.
Yeah, sure.
For coming.